Hello and welcome to the Impact Players Linking Shields podcast. And
The Reality Shift Podcast.
my name is Warren Mainard. With me today is my good friend Ethan Hare. We decided to take our two podcasts, bring them together, do one podcast together, share them on each of our platforms. But Impact Players is all about inspiring men to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders by equipping them to thrive in the relationships that matter most. And Ethan, you as a young man also have a passion for manhood, for masculinity, for young men, and what they can learn from older leaders as well. So this is an awesome opportunity for us to come together, to learn from one another, to share what some of our struggles are, and hopefully to walk away from this podcast really feeling a little bit more encouraged and equipped for how we can, as men of different ages and in different generations, link shields together to help really change the game in our culture. So tell me a little bit about you and the Reality Shift podcast and why you decided as an 18-year-old young man to start this podcast.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you first for having me on here. And I think this is a brilliant idea of joining the two podcasts together for one episode. I think it'll be fun because there's similar missions with both the communities. So, yeah, I think 2 years ago, I chose to follow Christ and I grew up in the church. It was a normal thing. I went to private Christian school for a couple of years. So I knew all the facts, all the statistics. I could ramble them off for you. Was great at memorizing, but I just never had that connection with the Lord. And then fast forward to when I was about 12, and I was at a youth camp, and it was a Thursday night, the notorious Thursday night, and I all of a sudden I just felt some feeling that I need to choose to follow Christ. So I said, you know what? I prayed a prayer, and I was like, Lord, I choose to follow you with my whole heart, my life, and then the youth pastor's like, if anyone wants to choose to follow Christ, you want to come up here so we can pray for you. So I decided to go up, and then afterward they pray for us. Afterward they're like, if you want to get baptized, let us know. And I was like, I don't want to go in front of a bunch of people. That's too scary. So it's like someday when I'm 15. So then a year or two later rolls around, and then I'm 15, and I was like, maybe when I'm 16. And I was like, maybe I'll have the courage then. So then when I was 16, I was like, I don't know. And I was like, maybe when I'm 17. So then it was that spring. And I had been spending more and more time in God's word because that was something I always struggled with, was spending time in God's word day and night as the Lord commands us to. And as I started spending more and more time in God's word, I just felt commanded that I need to, the Lord gave me a strength and a courage to start telling people about the gospel. And I didn't feel ashamed anymore of my faith. And so that made me realize, hey, I want to get baptized and proclaim that I chose to follow the Lord. Yeah. So that spring rolled around, Easter was coming up, and I was like, I want to get baptized. So I did. It was awesome, a lot of fun. You were there. It was awesome. So it was a great experience. I'll never forget it. It was like a new birthday, basically. But so that, and then about that next year, I remember everyone always telling me that becoming a Christian, it's not easy, you always think it's gonna get easy, but it's always gonna be worse. And I was like, yeah, but that's you. You're just projecting on me. I'm Ethan Hare. I'm different,
The Ethan Hare.
I'm the Ethan Hare. I'm different, I've always been that way. I was thinking at the time. And then that next year was probably one of the hardest years of my life. I was like, okay, maybe I should have calmed it down a little bit. And then this last year, though, as I started spending time in God's word daily, specifically this past couple of months, I spent time in God's word almost every single day. I think I missed a couple of days here and there, which that sounds great and all, but it doesn't matter unless the Lord's trying to speak through you and all these different things, and if your faith's not growing. And so I had this vision during the summer. I love to spend time in nature. As I was telling you earlier, I just went on a hike up Mount Si, or run up Mount Si, just so that's where the Lord speaks through me, is through other people in my life, mentors. And then also when I'm in nature. So when I have no noises around me. I'm just in silence and peace, just me,
Mhm.
God. And as I started to spend more and more time with him, I felt like he wanted me to create a community and use the people and the connections I have in my life as uh, tools, basically, and provide advice to younger men and older men as well
Mhm.
in a generation and in a world where being Christian is looked down upon. We're heavily persecuted at
Mhm.
probably the most we've ever seen in all of history. But yet
Mhm.
we have the greatest opportunity to bring the gospel to the world and become leaders and separate. There's the greatest opportunity, but also the greatest amount of persecution.
Mhm.
Uh, Probably since, well, definitely since the Lord was like Jesus was on earth, in my opinion. And so I started doing that, and then I started having mentors and talking to them, and they're like, "Yeah, that sounds great." And I started doing it, and I was like, "But I'm 18 though. Why would anyone want to listen to me?" And I was like, "You know what? Maybe no one wants to listen to me, but I feel like the Lord's telling me to." So I was like, "We'll just start getting around." And then I started procrastinating. I was supposed to start in August, and this is an old habit of mine, so I started procrastinating. And then
Mhm.
finally it came to December and I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'll pull the plug on it. And so I pulled a trailer. That went really good. And then it was heavily edited, but I just got it out there. Then from there, we had the podcast like a couple weeks ago, then this one and then one next week. And so it's started to spiral and the Lord's opened doors where I thought there would be people that I would try to ask, like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And I thought they would never say yes.
Mhm.
Uh, and it made me realize that I can't doubt what the Lord is capable of.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the Lord gave me a vision for a community ultimately. And this is only the start of it, in my opinion. The
Mhm.
podcast is an outlet uh,
Yeah.
to have a good input in people's head of the word and spending time around other brothers and sisters and well, specifically brothers. This is for men, the
Mhm.
community, and to have them become better fathers, better leaders, sons of God, and help them achieve the visions that God has put them in their life
Mhm.
and overcome a
Oh,
temptation through help and all these different things. That's the goal. And so the podcast is one way to do that.
man, I love that. It takes a lot to get something like this started. And one thing I know about you, Ethan, is that you've got a willingness to do hard things. Like you talked about running up Mount Si. Like most people don't wake up and say, "Hey, today I think I'm going to run up Mount Si." You're willing to, take the lead and speak at youth group, which you're doing on Sunday night. You were willing to do that hard thing and to make that decision to come to Christ as a 12-year-old, to be baptized in front of a bunch of peers and strangers. And you and I got to do a hard thing together just this
Hmm.
past November when we both ran our first marathon together,
Yeah.
and we trained together for that marathon.
Hmm.
And like that definitely, well, I won't speak for you, but that pushed me in ways that I definitely could not have imagined. But I think it's a great metaphor for what we're really talking about today, which is really like, how do we run this race together in a
Mm.
way where we're really like encouraging one another, inspiring one another, saying, hey, like, don't give up, take another step, get back up, get back in the race, and so like let's just talk about that a little bit. Like, you talked about being a young man, feeling like as a Christian, you're under persecution,
Mm.
and probably there are people who have lived at different eras and felt very similar to that. Certainly, we're in a culture right now where being a young Christian man in particular, um, kind of puts you square in the bullseye of what a lot of people think the problem with the world is. And what I'm here to say, and I think what you're here to say, is that young Christian men or Christian men in general are not the problem.
Mm.
We've been called to step into the problem and to help change the narrative, change the story, and help be the solution for the things that are broken in our culture today. So talk a little bit about, living in Seattle, Washington, being a Christian young man. Um, what is it like to be a young man in this day and age?
I think being a Christian as a young man in this day and age, there's temptations. There's two like ways to look at it, two lenses you could look at it. We could look at the negative or the positive. So we could start with the negative because that's our minds and that's like straight up go to always.
Mm-hmm.
So we have temptation going at us from our phones to
Mm-hmm.
computers to your TV, everything. Uh, from like Instagram to TikTok to Snapchat, dopamine, it's like a dopamine waterfall. Everything is around you, it's basically against you. And as a Christian, when you're in a world that's directly against you, and it's always been like that since the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, but right now, with everyone so connected, it makes it so easy for persecution to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially just as men in general with masculinity, that's being attacked. Uh, being men, it's looked down upon.
Yeah.
And being like a leader in society, that's looked down upon. And so, as young men nowadays, the problem is who are our role models? Who can we look to? And so, a lot of things, and I've seen this amongst a lot of my peers, is we go to people that look like superheroes. Because before in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
you had Arnold, you had
Mm-hmm.
like Rocky, and
Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris, man, that guy, dude, that man was a legend.
Yeah.
So you had Chuck Norris, you had Arnold, and you had Rocky.
Yeah.
And seeing those guys, it was good to be and cool to be a man. You're like, I'm gonna be a man. I'm gonna go out and do hard things. Now, I wouldn't say that's necessarily being a man. I think that's just doing masculine things.
Mm-hmm.
But still, there was those role models. Nowadays, in our generation, there's really nothing like that. The only thing you could really compare it to would be the Tate brothers. Whether you like them or not, I think they're a negative role model in my opinion. They have some good messages, but the majority of it is bad and a negative, like in my opinion. And so from what I've seen, and that's really the only role model you have. And so you have a lot of men that think it's great to sleep with a bunch of women, be
Mm-hmm.
around a bunch of women. Your goal is to make a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
sleep with a bunch of women, and it's great to get in great shape. Like I 100% agree with that. You're supposed to take care of your body. That's actually a speech that I'm studying all year for and giving at the end of the school year in front of the entire school
Mm-hmm.
is on taking care of your body. So that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But trying to, and this has become a thing of the red pill, blue pill, black pill
Right.
society of I can go and like mess with all these women, sleep with them. I'm a man, all these different things like that. And the problem is that's not rooted in the Lord. That's not what the Lord wants for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not God's plan. And that's not from God's word or from the Lord. And the problem that men have, specifically the youth, is there's no role models.
Right.
And right now in this generation, I think I can't speak for the generation before me or the one before that, uh, the fathers that have come before me, but there's not a lot of discipleship that happens. So after you choose to follow Christ, then it's like, yeah, you're a Christian now. And then you spend time in your word and all these different things. But then there's a lack of discipleship there. And
Yeah.
so you really have to be the one as a young man that's hunting the discipleship out, going and asking guys, hey, can you mentor me? Can you mentor me? Can you disciple me?
Mm.
And so I think that's one of the things in the church that we could do better, discipling young men and having them and joining them basically to another man and saying, hey, this is a guy you can look up to. And I think also a problem that falls into it specifically in my generation is the divorce rate's over 50%. And so
Mm.
half of all so that's 50% right there. And then like 15 to 20% of marriages just stay together just because of the kids and whatnot. So there's not even a great marriage there. So you have 50 to 75% of all marriages aren't great in the
Yeah.
first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of young men, they don't have fatherlessness is a massive thing nowadays.
Right.
So you don't have that strong masculine figure in your life. And so you go out and try to fill that void and fill that there. Because usually in a healthy family, healthy relationship with your father, you look at your father as like the guy. Or like not necessarily, sometimes it's your hero, sometimes it's just
Sure.
your protector, your provider. You're like,
Yeah.
that's a cool guy right there. You might not necessarily want to be him, but you're like, that's a guy that could be like, or
Right.
have similar things as him. Like I like that. And that's a good role model for you. Uh, and so I think that's where mentorship comes in. That's where discipleship comes in a society, in a culture, in an age when fatherlessness is so high and there's a
Mhm.
lack of role models. They're the brothers in Christ, the elders need to step up in their role with younger men in
Yeah.
discipleship.
Yeah. And I think, that's what's cool about like this conversation that we're having because, for me, what I do with impact players is I work with men, really anywhere from like 24 years old up to
Mhm.
84. But I would say a large contingent of the men that I work with are like, between the ages of like 30 and 50.
Mhm.
And so they're married, they're having kids, or they've got, kids. And what I've found is that a lot of the men that I meet are themselves feeling like they're broken. They're feeling like they have never had that mentor. A lot of the men didn't have a dad in their lives when they were
Mhm.
growing up. And so they're kind of saying, like I need somebody to mentor me
Mhm.
before I can, mentor somebody else. I don't feel like I'm qualified. I'm divorced or my marriage is struggling or I'm struggling with pornography. Who am I to, invest in somebody else? One of the things that I always tell men, and this is kind of an age-old, you know, example, but I always tell men that all of us in our lives should have a Timothy, a Barnabas, and a Paul. And that Timothy is that younger man that you can invest in, that you can share whatever life examples and stories and experience that you've, accumulated, whether you're 18 or 85.
Mhm.
Everybody needs to have a Barnabas. That's like just a buddy that's an encourager, somebody that understands what you're going through. And then everybody needs to have a Paul, an older mentor, And so even though I'm 48, I've got guys in my life who are, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s who are pouring into me because I don't have all the answers either. But I look back on when I was 19 years old, I became a youth pastor at 19, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I had some mentors
Yeah.
who, like, anytime I didn't know what I was thinking or talking about, or didn't understand a certain thing from the Bible that I was going to be teaching about or whatever, I could go to those leaders, ask them for advice, ask them for wisdom. They'd give me what I need, and then I could kind of go then and pass it on to someone else.
Mhm.
Um, so like if you were to kind of like imagine like there's a group of guys that are listening to this podcast and they're in their 40s, maybe they're in their 50s, and they're saying like, hey, what can I do to help, guys your age, guys like, say 15 to 25? What can I do to help guys, your age when I don't feel like I'm like this awesome mentor, but I want to invest, I want to make a difference. What are just some simple ways that you think older guys could take a step to pour into your generation?
One of the things I would say is just to encourage you, brothers, as you guys are listening, is no matter the moment where you're in, I've had mentors that were struggling from pornography to divorces to everything, you name it. But one of the things that remained consistent is their relationship with me
Hmm.
way in my life. And so the thing that matters is that the man that you're pouring into, the young man that you're pouring into, sees that you're striving to be the best version of yourself and the best version that God creates you to be. as humans, we're going and as children of God, we're going to be struggling. We're going to be sinning. Everyone has that. Now you might be saying, well, I have it worse than another person. I've had mentors that have gone through some really crazy stuff, and I'm not going to say what you're dealing with is not bad. But one of the things is no matter what goes on, is pouring into that young man consistently.
Mm.
Uh, One of the things young men look for, specifically in mentors, is they don't want they don't want their dad. They don't want their dad telling them, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that bad.
Mm.
There comes a time and a place,
Yeah.
but for you as older men, the thing that younger men are looking for is advice. They come to you and be like, hey, I'm
Mm.
struggling with this. I'm dealing with this. What can I do to get out of this? How can I improve? How can I change?
Yeah.
That's what young men are looking for, is they want connection, they want advice, and they want consistency in their life with men that they can trust and they can have people hold them accountable. That's where a mentor comes into place. That's what your role would be as a mentor.
Yeah, what I love about that is that really anybody can do that.
Hmm.
Like you didn't say, oh, you need to know the Bible frontward to backward,
Yeah.
you need to be able to bench press 300 pounds, you don't need to be able to like, uh be this perfect example of how to raise your kids or how to,
Hmm.
love your wife. Like we're all going to fall short, and I think like one of the characteristics we talk about the 10 characteristics of an impact player, one of those characteristics is audacious authenticity.
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah.
just being like so authentic that it helps the younger man realize, oh,
Hmm.
wow, I can be honest about what I'm struggling with because this guy that I look up to, like he's being more honest than I ever thought he would ever be,
Yeah.
and that has a powerful effect on someone. So I love the way you put that. That's great. And I guess, you know, the kind of the flip side of that is like, most of the time an older man is not going to go to a younger man to ask him to mentor him.
Hmm.
That's not generally the role,
Yeah.
but there are things that younger men can teach older men.
Mm.
There are things that older men can learn from the younger generation. So maybe like what are some things that you feel like, hey, like guys my age can kind of help bring to the table,
Hmm.
whether it's just a unique perspective, maybe it's like some skills in technology or social media or whatever that might be, but just like what would be some of the things that a guy my age would benefit from by having a mentor relationship with a younger man?
Yeah, I think it's, I wouldn't say it's a difficult question, but it's a question that definitely makes me think. It's a really, really good question. Uh, I think going back to when I was 12, I was a part of this group where there was a bunch of people. I was the youngest person, I think, by like 20 years. I did not fit there at all.
Hmm.
And we had one guy who's now become a close friend and mentor of mine. He's 60, 61. And then there was another guy. He had kids. His kids were already past the age of 30. They were already twice my age at that point.
Hmm.
So I felt like I had nothing that I could bring to the table. There was another guy that was going through divorce at that time, and I felt like I had nothing that I could do. I couldn't help there. And what one of the things over the years, and now talking to those brothers, since then, there was a couple of things that they brought up that they said I added to the group at that age, which now looking back, I realize I did, and I think all young men can do this, is their level of energy. As Jesus tells us when he took the child onto his lap and said, have the faith of this little one here. Uh, and whoever like helps this one into the kingdom, I'm really misquoting it, but
You're pretty good.
yeah,
You're pretty close.
Yeah. And so, but he says, like, have the faith of like this little one here. And I think that's one of the things there is talking back to those mentors when I was in that group. Now talking back to him 6 years later, one of the things they said is seeing my faith as when I was little, in comparison, is they saw that I trusted in God completely, and my energy level also is younger guys, they're full of energy, and
Mm.
there's almost like an innocence to them where like I can conquer the world and it
Yeah,
revitalizes you.
that's
Uh,
right.
like I have older mentors right now, and I have like kids, like youth that I'm pouring into as well currently. So I
Mhm.
have my own Timothy, I have my Barnabas, I have my guys, and I have my mentors as well. And so one of the things is they energize you, they have
Mhm.
faith like nothing else, and they're fun to be around. You think all your buddies are friend and fun until you hang out with kids and they're super energetic. They run around you
Yep.
and you have a lot of fun. You're like, okay, well, that's great and all. I have my own kids. So why would I need more kids in my life? That's
Right.
that's one of the things that I've had other men like that's one of their main arguments against it. One of the things to that I would say is it is a completely different relationship to it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's one of the things I remember when I first had my first mentor. I was like, this guy's like over twice my age. And one of the things when I was talking to him, now looking back, he's just like, I didn't want to have it where I was trying to be your father. I wasn't trying to tell you have to do it this way, or you don't have to do it
Mhm.
that way. One of the things that's good is a young man will come to you for advice. He won't come for you for direction. Sometimes he might falsely come to you for direction, but he'll come to you for advice. And so your child will come to you for direction, and you'll have to discipline your child. You won't have to discipline the kid you mentor. Uh, and I think that's one of the things there is the key difference is the energy that you experience from the person you mentor
Yeah.
and the fact that they have an heartedness. They want to see you. Sometimes your kid does not want to be around you at all, or they
Sure.
don't even
Yeah.
think you're cool. The person you're mentoring,
I'm
and
not like most dads. I'm a
no,
cool
yeah, you are. I actually agree with that
dad.
about that. I don't know if Micah 100% agrees with that. I think he thinks you're a cool dad. But I mean, I've ran a marathon with you. Not many dads can say they've ran a marathon, so that's pretty cool in my opinion. Uh, but one of the things I would say is the difference is you're not it's not your kid. The person wants to see you. They're eager to see you.
Right.
They want your
Right.
advice. They want to learn from your experiences. They want to hear how God has worked in your life.
Mhm.
Want to be with you.
Yeah, that's a key. I like that. And, just that desire to grow.
Mhm.
Sometimes it feels like as a parent, you're like, man, I have all this stuff I want to tell you, but you don't want to hear it. You've got
Mhm.
your headphones in, you're looking at a screen,
Yeah.
so like when somebody says, "Hey, I want you to mentor me," what they're doing is they're kind of saying, like Jesus said, he who has eyes and hear and ears, let him see and hear. And I think a mentor and mentee relationship is a young man saying, "Hey, I have eyes to see and ears to hear what you want to tell me."
Mhm.
And that's a pretty exciting thing when you get in that opportunity. So here's what I want to do. I realize that like as an older man, my typical mentality is to get into the driver's seat and just drive the car, right? Because
Uh-huh.
I've been driving a lot longer than you.
That
But
is true.
here's what I want to do is I want to undo my seatbelt. I want to get out of the driver's seat. I want you to come into the driver's seat now of this podcast. I'm going to sit in the passenger seat and I want you to drive the next 20 minutes or so of our time together with whatever things you want to talk about, questions that you have. But, from here on out, you're driving this podcast forward.
Great. Took the steering wheel. We're gonna turn in the keys, tug off the parking brake. We're in full drive. Let's go, baby.
Here we go.
Uh, yeah, we'll turn on some like Lenny Kravitz or something. We'll get back to
Okay.
your age,
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, so one of my questions for you, I think, and this goes along with being a mentor, is when you have what is one of the downfalls you've had in the past with trying to mentor young men? As there's that young man out there
Mhm.
that is wanting someone to mentor him, or he's currently having someone, well, specifically if a man is having someone mentor him,
Mhm.
what are one of the things and the mistakes you've seen young men do when you've tried to mentor them, or you've seen other young men make when they have someone pouring into them?
Yeah, it's a great question because I have had the opportunity to mentor lots and lots of young men over the years, and I would
Mhm.
say like maybe three big things that can kind of cause a mentor relationship to just fizzle out. One is a lack of consistency. So
Mhm.
you talked about, as a older man being consistent, and that goes both ways. So if it's kind of like, hey, we're gonna get together on Mondays at 5 p.m., every week, and one of the people, let's say the younger man, keeps saying, hey, I can't do it, I can't do it, I'm out. At
Mhm.
some point you start to wonder, hey, does this guy really want this? Does he really value this time? Because essentially when a younger man comes to an older man and says, hey, will you mentor me? What he's saying is, I want you to invest your time and your wisdom and experience into me. And
Mhm.
that's a great gift that
Mhm.
a mentor can give to a younger man. But if that gift is kind of not appreciated, or it's taken for granted, then that can kind of cause a mentor relationship to fizzle out. I would say the second thing is, like you were talking about, like the mentor is not the dad.
Yeah.
Like if I'm mentoring you, I'm not your dad. And the good news about that is that you don't have to, quote unquote, worry about disappointing me the way that maybe you worry about disappointing your real dad or
Mhm.
the dad figure in your life. So like I want you as the younger man to be authentic and to share your struggle. And
Mhm.
even if we've talked about one struggle multiple times, and you've said, this is it, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do this anymore, you
Yeah.
know, and then you come back and you're like, I did it again. You know,
Yeah.
one of the reasons why people can kind of quit on a relationship is they feel like I've fallen down one too many times.
Mhm.
Like I've disappointed my mentor and he's not going to want to see me anymore.
Mhm.
But just realize that, you know, a, the key to a great mentor-mentee relationship is grace and authenticity,
Mhm.
because that's what Jesus gave to us, is that amazing grace. Um, and then I think, the third challenge for mentor and a mentee relationship is really just about kind of making sure that you have some good parameters and purpose to
Mhm.
what you're doing. And so like what I mean by parameters and purpose is that there is a time and a place for getting together with an older man and just kind of shooting the bull for a couple
Mhm.
hours. Um, but I think when you're really talking about mentoring, you're kind of saying like, hey, there are some things that I'm trying to learn from you. There are some areas in my life I'm trying to grow in. There's some things I'm trying to overcome.
Mhm.
And let's get really focused about that. So we may take a few minutes to kind of shoot the bull and talk about, the Washington Husky football team, or why the Seattle Mariners can never seem to win or get their act together.
Yeah.
Uh, but you really want to try to like get into the heart of like, what are we here about? And
Mhm.
if it is like, hey, I want to grow as a man, I want to figure out what my purpose in life is. I want to become a better follower of Jesus. I want to learn how to be a leader of my peers. I want to learn how to be successful in real estate. Whatever that is,
Mhm.
like identify the purpose and kind of set the parameters. so that you can really get the most out of that relationship, and also so that the older mentor can feel like, okay, I'm giving him something that's going to really help him, and I'm not just kind of wasting my, not that like any time spent together is not valuable, but I'm not like wasting my time just kind of goofing around with somebody. So I think that's the key, is like, when I was, I'll share a quick story. Like when I was 16 years old,
Mm.
um, kind of like you, God got a hold of my life in a powerful way. And I was on fire for Christ. And I felt like God was calling me to become a youth pastor, which I did. I became a youth pastor at 19 years old. So I started going to my youth pastor's office once a week, and we would spend a couple hours together. And it was really all focused around this purpose of me wanting to figure out how to become the kind of man, the kind of leader who could become a youth pastor. And so some of it was like studying the Bible, some of it was memorizing scripture, but other times it was like, hey, let's go clean out the youth van after a crazy youth weekend that we just came back from, or let's go run to Target and get supplies for the games on Wednesday night. Let's go and like get the youth room set up for youth group tomorrow night, whatever that might be.
Mhm.
But while we were doing these things together, he was pouring into me. And my youth pastor was showing me, what does it look like to be a youth pastor? So even at 19, like I kind of had in my mind like a template of how do I do a good youth ministry? And it was really just like, I'm just going to do what I saw Mark do and what he taught me to do.
Mhm.
So I think that's a specific example, but that can apply to a lot of different areas of life.
Okay. So consistency and purpose and parameters. Well, consistency, purpose plus parameters
Yeah,
equals
and
good
and
mentorship.
and just not getting discouraged by failure,
Okay.
you know. So you're
Yeah.
going to fail, and you're going to fail again, and you're going to fail again, but don't let that failure keep you from meeting with your mentor regularly.
Yeah. I've the first one with the consistency that convicted me. And then there's something 2 weeks ago where I have a mentor for real estate specifically, and I felt two mentors, and but they're both combined in it and pouring into me on this. And I felt that I had stumbled. And so I like talked to him and I was like, I'm sorry, man. They're like, at the end of the day, you're not my wife, you're not my kids. They just told me blunt and like, you're I love you apologizing and thank you for coming straight with me. But even though you failed, you're not in my circle of influence necessarily. I'm
Mhm.
pouring into you, but you're not my family, you're not my kids, and so it doesn't directly affect me. But thank you for letting me know still.
Mhm.
And one of the things is I felt discouraged. I was like, I don't think I can have these people pour into me. I actually told him, I was like, hey, it's fine if you're pissed off at me and you don't want to pour into me anymore. Like, dude, it doesn't matter. You're like, you're 18, you're way ahead of the game in this direction. I was like, oh, okay. And they like reframe the mindset. And that's one of the things I think is important
Right.
with the mentors. They reshift and reframe your mindset and they help you understand a vision
Mm.
that sometimes you can't see. And that's how God speaks through us. And I think when you spend consistently through and in those relationships and you
Mhm.
have that purpose and you say, hey, we're going to talk about this. We're going to
Yeah.
spend time talking about the word or talking about being a youth pastor, then God blesses that and turns it into a gift and it helps both of you guys. I think that's a
Mm.
beautiful thing that God has allowed in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing I'll just say too is like, over the course of your life, you're going to have mentors and mentees that just kind of come in and
Mhm.
they walk with you, and then they come out.
Yeah.
And like that's normal. That's okay. Like, maybe you might have somebody that's your mentor for 70 years, but most likely it's somebody that's in your life for a season,
Mm.
and they may kind of, slide out of your life in that direct mentor relationship, but don't let that wound your soul or cause you to feel like, they've let you down or betrayed you. Just be grateful for that season that you got to have them. I mean, just remember, like, Luke only got like 2 sessions with Yoda before Yoda was gone, but Yoda changed his life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like, not every mentor-mentee relationship is going to be a lifetime contract, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And so I'm just like, I'm grateful for the guys that have slid into my life for a while,
Mm.
and then maybe they've moved away or their career changed, or whatever, they went to school. And like, I'm just grateful that I got to have that year or 18 months or 3 years with that guy. And it's cool when, like, 10 years later he calls you and says, hey, like, now I'm mentoring someone else and I'm telling them the same things you told me. And so those are just things to kind of remember as well, is that, like, it's not always a lifetime type of deal.
Yeah. I conviction with that one as well. Is I remember like a couple of years, I think it was like 2 years ago. I was like, why are these people coming in and out of my life? They were like my mentors, and I was like, something's wrong. They're supposed to be staying around forever. And I realized I was like,
Mhm.
that's not humans how humans operate. It's the same thing with friends.
Right.
Is you're not gonna have you might have two friends from high school that you still spend time with after you graduate high school, and you'll
Mhm.
spend more time with your college friends, but even then you won't have many college friends. And most of the time they're people in your life for a season. And I thought at the time that they're supposed to stay with you forever, which it's a childish mindset, but it's that shows also you the innocence of the childlike mind. And then you start to grow, you start to realize, and God opens your vision in terms of how the world works, which I think is pretty funny. But
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways you can look at it. You can get cynical and just be like, why should I invest in you or let you invest in me? Because you're not going to be around 2 years from now or 10 years from now.
mhm.
Or you can be grateful and say, like, man, like, this guy's investing in me. I don't know how long it'll last, but like, for as long as it does last, I'm gonna soak it up and be thankful for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the cynic mindset, and it's very prevalent among like my generation, is why would I even want to go out to like ask a mentor or talk to that cute girl or something like that? Why would you want to
Mhm.
when I can stay at home and play video games or I can look at porn? Why would I want to? And even then, there's all this stuff on social media that you see of like women rejecting men or all this stuff. And so you think and you have this fear that comes from it as well.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest lessons I learned in the last year, my life has changed dramatically in the last year, specifically because of this one thing, is I realized where there's a fear, that's where you want to dive in. Where the fear is, that's where you should jump in over the edge, head
Mhm.
first, and go in towards that fear because God will work through you in that. That's the place where you can grow. And for example, I was always scared of running in the dark growing up. And
Mhm.
so for me, I was like, okay, we're going to make it a rule. 2 times a week, I go and run out from Fall City to Carnation in the back. It's
Mhm.
pitch black out there. There's 5 farms. There's no light out there at all. I don't even wear a headlamp because I can't see that well with the headlamp anyway. Uh, and so that made me grow into the fear. I was scared of running in the dark. So I said, hey, let's just jump head first. And that
Mhm.
actually grew my faith a lot. And so one of the things for people, especially Gen Z, is we're scared to talk to people and get out of our box, the people
Yeah.
we don't know. And I think one of the things with mentorship is it grows you so much. And the reward is way higher than the risk with talking to people and getting outside your box and trying something new. Because mentorship is definitely something new and unique nowadays, specifically. It's not that common, but yet it has such a beautiful and massive benefit to both parties
Mhm.
involved.
Yeah, I love that idea of just like leaning into your fear, because, like, if you fear rejection, then the easiest thing to do is to avoid any and every situation where
Mhm.
you might experience rejection. But what does that do? It actually conditions you to be more afraid all the time,
Mhm.
right? But if you fear rejection and you go out and you try to be a friendly person, meet new people, ask people to help you, ask that girl out, you
Hmm.
know, like share the gospel with non-believers, try to make that sale for the work, that you do,
Hmm.
whatever it is. Like every single time you do it, you're like putting like a little Lego brick of confidence in your life that, hey, I did it, I tried,
Yeah.
and I'm still here. Like I'm not going anywhere.
I'm still alive, baby.
My life is not over because
Yeah.
somebody said no, or
Yeah.
turned me down or whatever. And eventually you become that man who has so much confidence and courage that people start to look at you and they go, man, this guy is unafraid of rejection. I'm going to put him in situations where he can really strengthen that muscle even more. And again, it's like, like Paul talks about, in my weakness, I am made strong
Mm.
through Christ, Christ who strengthens me. And so it's like, what are those areas that you feel like are a weakness? And then how can Jesus make you strong by you drilling down on that thing over and over and over again until that weakness is now a strength?
Yeah. Yeah, for that was one of the things is drilling it. I remember reading that passage last year, right around this time of the year. And for me, I'm an extrovert. I like being around people, but it's only when I knew people. That was at the time. And so for
Mhm.
me, I said, okay, I went to coffee shops a lot then, and I would always go to a store with malls or by myself or with other people. And so I said, okay, we'll make a rule. I have to talk to three strangers every single day. But for the first month, the rule is all I had to do was give them a compliment and then I'd just walk away. It felt really awkward, but I didn't like talking to strangers. So we started doing that. So I'd go like, I remember this one girl and I was like, I think she's cute. So I went up to her and I just said, hey, you're cute. And I just walked away and like I skittled like away like a little penguin. And I'm walking away and I'm like, ugh. And I was like, maybe she's gonna freak out or something. But I was like, okay. And then afterward, I was like, holy crap, I'm still alive. I'm still here. And
Yeah.
then I went from that to now a month later. I was going up, I was having conversations. I would have conversations with the barista. Now I can go into a mall a year later and I'm known from my friends of just going in and just talking to the person behind the cash register or something like that for a good 30 to 40 minutes.
Mm,
And the way that God uses you and God spends time with you, well, not spends time with you, but the way God uses you uh when you press into that weakness and how God strengthens you is a beautiful thing. Like last year, I was scared and petrified and
mm,
terrified to talk to strangers. And then a couple weeks ago, I saw a homeless guy on the side of the road, and I said, I should go up talk to him. But like 2 years ago, or a year ago, I would have been scared to talk to anyone, regardless
mm.
of who it was. And I said, okay, you know what? We'll just go and talk to him. I felt called to go and talk to him. So I ended up having like 2 hour conversation with him. And the
Wow.
thing is, how God pours into you and strengthens you in your weakness, like Paul says,
Mhm.
it's it's incomprehensible how God can use you. It's unlimited the ways God can use you when you pour and you spend time over and over and over and over and over again into that weakness. And you just pound it and pound it and pound
Yeah.
it and spend more and more time working on that. God will use that weakness as your strength. For example, Moses, he
Mm.
had a horrible stutter. He wasn't the best at speaking. He said, God, why would you want to use me when I don't like speaking in front of people? So God said, fine, I'll use Aaron as your mouthpiece, basically. And then he
Mm.
took that, and then Moses ended up speaking to Aaron or to the Pharaoh, and God used him from that. And then he led all of the Israelites and
Yeah.
spoke among them. And God had a direct relationship with him. A guy who was not good at speaking was speaking on the regular with God.
Yeah.
God used his weakness
Mm.
and turned it into his strength to lead a nation. That's what God is. That's what you're capable of when you press into that weakness.
Yeah, I love that. And I was thinking about, even before you started to talk about Moses, I was thinking about Joshua,
Yeah.
who Joshua is known for his courage. Like he was one of the 12 spies that said, "Hey, we can take these guys. We can take the promised land." The other 10 were afraid because they said we're like grasshoppers compared to how big and tall they are.
Mhm.
And as a result, the nation of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. God says, "Okay, Joshua, Moses is gone. You're in charge now." And in the first chapter of Joshua, God says to him like 4 or 5 times, "Have I not commanded you, be strong and
Be
courageous?"
courageous. Yeah.
Now, you know, if God tells you something like be strong and courageous 4 or 5 times, the reason why God is telling you that is because you don't feel like you're strong and courageous.
Mm.
You need to hear that over and over from God because you don't feel like that's who you are. But because Joshua heard from God and he heard what God had to say about him, that you're going to be this man who is strong and courageous because I've commanded you to be that man. Then the whole rest of the book of Joshua makes sense
Mm.
because you see the strong and courageous man who's basically just living out what he believes God has said about him, And so uh I think like just going back to that idea of like overcoming fear, um believing about yourself that you are a courageous man.
Mm.
Like saying that because of God, I am a courageous man. Because of God, I am a strong man.
Mhm.
And like believing that truth that that's who God made me to be. That's what it means to be a man, by the way, is to be strong and courageous. Like that's
Yeah.
one of the characteristics of a man.
Mm.
And so a lot of men don't feel like they're strong and courageous, but what they need to do is they need to hear what God says about them. And
Yeah.
what God says is you are strong and courageous because that's what I've commanded you to be. I wouldn't command you to be something that you're not.
Yeah. Yep, that is true. Yeah, I think I'm gonna give it credit where credit's due. Matt Friesen, a good mentor of mine,
Mm,
that's one of the things he's always pressed heavily into me is who does God say you are? Because social media
mm,
says these things, your friends say these things,
yeah.
the world says all these things, that cute girl says stuff about you, that homie, the dude that does not like you, the bully, they all have things to say about you. But
Mm,
what does God say about you? And so spend time in the word figuring out, for example, he always says, find 20 things that God says are true about you,
mm,
characteristics, who you are, your role in life. And so I think that's really key as men is knowing what does God say we are? What does God say our purpose is? Because we always hear, God, you're supposed to be a leader. You're supposed to
mm,
be a man. You're supposed to be
mm.
the anchor in the relationship. You're
Right,
supposed to be that driver. You're supposed to be the leader. You're supposed to be basically the jackhammer in life. You're going at it all the time. But what does God say about you? What does
right.
God say your role is? Who does he say you are? What does he say your characteristics are? For example, you're supposed to be strong and courageous.
Mm,
And Joshua 1:9, I remember I learned in third grade, it's when I go on those runs out in the dark, that was I think I did an hour and a half run, and I said that for every single second of it. Is you're supposed to be strong and courageous. And I know you might not feel like it, but right after that line, it says, God says, do not be afraid. Uh,
yeah.
for I am with you, basically, to shorten it.
Mm,
So don't be afraid. I am
yeah.
with you. That is what God says about you when you don't feel strong and when you don't feel courageous. God has given that to you, and God has given you the courage and the strength. You just have to use it.
So A.W. Tozer, who is a pretty wise and godly, intelligent
A
man,
little bit.
wrote the book The Pursuit of God and God's Pursuit of Man. But he says the most important thing about a person is what comes to their minds when they think about God. And what he's trying to say about that is that, like, if you have a small picture of God in your mind, if you don't see God as powerful, loving, compassionate, almighty, all those things, then you're never going to honor God, obey God, trust God, follow God the way that God wants you to. So A.W. Tozer says the most important thing about a person is what comes to their mind when they think about God. But what I've added to that statement is the second most important thing about a person is what comes to God's mind when he thinks about us. And that's what you were just talking about, is like, it's important for me to know that I'm thinking the right thoughts about God, but it's also important for me to know that God is thinking the right thoughts about me. And like, especially like you talk about social media, you talk about all the messages of the world, you talk about guys feeling like isolated, alone, ashamed, broken, just angry, bitter, all of these different things. They feel like victims. They feel like they're outcasts, all these things. If you listen to all those voices, it will just completely destroy you. But if you listen to the only voice that matters, which is God's voice, it will build you up and you can be that man who we like to say in Impact Players, that we're thermostats, not thermometers. Thermometers just reflect the temperature of the room around them, but thermostats set the temperature. And so we can set the temperature when we know who we are, and we can know who we are when we know who God is and what God says about us. And so, hey, let's go ahead, let's land the plane
Yeah.
and pull the car into the driveway. But as you kind of bring some of these thoughts to culmination, what are two or three takeaways from this podcast that you want to walk away from and that you think maybe other young men or even older men listening might be able to just take away? We call them with Impact Players, we call them nuggets. Like,
Yeah.
what are two or three nuggets that you think are worth holding on to as a result of this podcast?
Well, I don't have any bacon to guarantee for anyone that if they don't get a nugget from this podcast, they'll get a lifelong supply of bacon. But if I did have it, I guarantee it. Um, but I would say top three things that I have taken away from this podcast is consistency as a young man in a relationship with an older man in a mentorship is key. Not only that, but having purpose and having a plan and
Mhm.
parameters for what the goal is, what you're trying to accomplish. Because without it, you're running mindlessly through a field.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, that at the end is courage. God gives you these things. God gives you the strength, but you have to press into the weakness, as Paul says, press into the weakness, and from that, the Lord gives you strength.
Yeah, it's great. I know for me, what I want to take away from this is like really being intentional. Like we all get busy with our lives. We all get consumed with like everything on our massive to-do list. But if you want to be an impact player, the way that you make a true impact is investing in other people. And you can invest in your marriage, you can invest in your children, you can invest in your church. But one critical way that you can invest in making an impact is by being a mentor for a younger man or asking an older man to be a mentor to you. Like that's going to change the temperature. That's going to change the game in eternity. And so be intentional. One of my talks that I give is that there's four words that can change your life. And it's this: pick up the phone. Just pick up the phone. Find a young man or find an older man, pick up the phone and say, hey, can we get coffee? Can we grab lunch? Can we go for a run together? I want to spend more time with you to either grow and learn from you or I want to be able to invest in you and pour something into you. And so just be intentional in that, because otherwise you'll blink and like, the years pass by and you just have kind of been burning the midnight oil, but not really getting anywhere.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you everybody for listening to both of these podcasts. I want to thank uh, Ethan with the Reality Shift podcast. Thank you for those that are part of the Impact Players community. You can find both of these podcasts, on YouTube, on the Spotify, Apple, all those kind of things. Ethan, tell our Impact listeners how they can follow you.
Yeah, you can find us find me on YouTube at Reality Shift Podcast. That's the name of it, but it'd be R Shift Pod, so RSHFT Pod. Or you can find us on Instagram at Reality Shift Podcast, or Reality Shift Pod for that matter. So Reality Shift Pod for Instagram, then for YouTube, R Shift Pod, and then at Spotify, Reality Shift Podcast, and then same thing with Apple Podcasts. So yeah, and it'll be an open Delta symbol, red, white, black.
And if you're a Reality Shift listener, I'll just make it really simple. Go to impactplayers.org and you can find all of our social media links, all of our resources, blogs, podcasts, videos. It's all right there. So impactplayers.org. Ethan, thanks so much for being a part of this podcast. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Proud of you, excited about what you're doing. Looking forward to our next run and our next marathon together.
Sir.
But with that, we'll sign off and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you, brother.